Chapter 5. Separate and Unequal. Ah, I see that the separatists are not alone, my king. Look there, Raythe said as he tipped his head towards the direction of Tyrael. His keen eyes had picked out 4 horsemen riding towards them at breakneck speed, intent on reaching them before, or at least at the same time, as the separatists. They are not Raythe riders, Acklin remarked as he shaded his eyes to see them more clearly. Alasha appeared even more annoyed by these riders than the separatists. It's General Michael Baston and some of his officers. Raythe frowned slightly at the name, as if it was familiar to him. Ah, he is the highest leader of the human military on this continent, isn't he? Yes, he constantly seeks to convince Father that he and his people should be allowed to fight with us against the Leviathan. It's ridiculous, of course, she answered. Fight the Leviathan? Raythe let out a bark of laughter. This was one subject that he and Alasha agreed upon. With what? And how? They might as well slit their own throats as go up against a Leviathan. It will accomplish the same thing. They've been told that repeatedly, but General Baston insists that there must be a way for humans to assist in their own defense. Alasha answered with a half-hearted shrug. Father has told them to concentrate on the things they can do, like preserving their history and having children, but General Baston does not listen to reason. And he's not a separatist? Raythe lifted an eyebrow. He respects the laws and wishes to move forward with the Empire. He understands that humanity's only possibility of continuing is with us, but he is determined to make humanity more useful? She shrugged again as she made that statement a question, clearly not understanding the mortal's concerns here. My king, Commander Severin said as he rode around to Acklin's side. Per Acklin's request, the protectors remained behind them, so there was at least the illusion of a private ride amongst friends. Raythe liked the fact that Acklin was confident in his own ability to protect himself, and cared not for the pomp and circumstance of leadership. King Vax was rather the same, but his reasoning was a little different. Allowing someone near him would mean that they would have a chance to strike. Severin continued, Would you have us ride out and deal with these people? No, Commander Severin. I would have you remain where you were. I will handle this, Acklin said calmly. Severin, they're a bunch of humans. What can they do? Shoot at us with their guns? Alasha shook her head in derision. Human weapons didn't just not work against the Leviathan. An untrained child could handle them. We're not going to handle them with violence, Alasha, Acklin stated firmly. That will hardly lead to a rapprochement with them. Ah, here he goes again, with that listening to the people thing, and not taking a firm hand with them. Raythe sighed internally. The exact opposite of what Vex would do. Vex would have chopped off some heads, stuck them on pikes, and put them in the town squares, where all the humans could see what happens to those who disobey, Raythe thought. Who am I kidding? He would never have saved humanity in the first place. And I should be glad Acklin is nothing like him, truly. Words won't either, Uncle, Alasha said. Father has spoken to them until he's blue in the face. It's done less than nothing. I am certain my brother has tried his very best. I doubt I shall do any better, Alasha. But we must try, Acklin remarked gently, but his eyes met Raythe's. Raythe suppressed a grin. The truth was that while Veslin adored politics, he was terrible at diplomacy. Acklin had confessed to Raythe that he knew it was a risk to grant Veslin the power of emissary, but their relationship had never been an easy one, so not giving Veslin such a position would have resulted in a rift that they might never recover from. While Raythe thought that such a breach should be encouraged, Acklin did not. Veslin was all that was left of Acklin's immediate family. His king would not risk alienating the fussy, arrogant older Raythe, but Raythe thought it was just a matter of time before it occurred in any case. And how much damage will Veslin do in the meantime? Raythe thought. I'm sure if anyone can talk sense into them, it is you, Uncle. But Elisha's expression was doubtful that anyone was capable of this. Commander Severin slowly rode back to his prior position. Humans might not be a threat, but this was clearly an insult to Aquilin, and Commander Severin would have liked to answer it with violence. Raythe rather agreed with him, but they'd do it Aquilin's way first, until that way does not work. The three vehicles roared to a halt not 20 feet from them. Dust clouds rose up. Ripped and crushed vegetation was left in their wake. Noxious fumes emanated from their exhausts. He saw Elisha wave her hand in front of her face and cough. Aquilin showed no reaction. Raythe was similarly unmoved, but unlike Aquilin, he was smiling. It was the smile he wore into battle. Aquilin gave Raythe a stern look and said, "They are our people too, Raythe." "Even if they don't think so?" Raythe asked back. "Yes, especially if they don't," Aquilin answered and lightly got down from Arendriel. Raythe and Elisha got down as well. The horses remained where they were, as they were well trained, but also because of the mental connection each of them held with the beautiful beasts. It had been difficult establishing such a connection with Silveril, because the Kindreth controlled the creatures that served them, while the Raythe requested a mutual exchange. These horses had expected the latter when he'd tried the former. He'd been tossed off of Silveril's back one too many times until he had, finally, learned the Raythe way. Only then had Silveril deigned to allow him to ride her. It was through patience and way too many sugar cubes that had won her over completely. But now she was as close to him as Arendriel was to Aquilin. He was rather proud of that. Arendriel leaned over and started nibbling some flowers. Silveril joined him. Soon all three animals were munching the sweet vegetation. Aquilin made no move towards the humans. He was clearly waiting for the separatists to emerge from their vehicles and approach. They did not have to wait long. The first human got out from a white vehicle, swinging his long legs down as the machine was lifted over a foot in the air on its big tires. He wore jeans, leather pointed toe boots, which Raythe believed were referred to as cowboy boots, and a red and white checked flannel shirt that was untucked. He sported a broad-brimmed white hat, a cowboy hat, and dark aviator sunglasses shielded his eyes. Raythe had made it a point to understand humans, not out of some benign urge to study a dying mortal race, but to make sure they posed no threat. He found, much to his surprise, that he rather liked them as a rule. This first separatist's skin was leathery and tanned a deep bronze, and he appeared, though it was always hard for Raythe to tell human ages, around the mid-century mark. That meant he was a mature adult already in middle age, who likely wouldn't live to see twice that amount. On his hip was a holster with a gun, which he adjusted as soon as his boots hit the ground. In Katir, Elisha whispered, "That is Duke Rohannan, leader of the 401st, as these separatists call themselves. I don't know the other two. They aren't important." She pursed her lips as if she tasted something bitter as she added, "He has an ever-changing cadre of young men, always men, with him." Two younger men, dressed similarly to Rohannan, stepped out of the black trucks that flanked him. They too were armed. Raythe sighed and murmured a few Katir swears that involved the folly of weak men. Aquilin had schooled his expression to be smooth and unreadable. "Do you speak English?" Rohannan asked as he approached. A fork of lightning appeared in the air between him and Aquilin from Raythe's clever fingers, stopping the separatist abruptly. He tried not to show the fear Raythe knew he was experiencing, but the way his hand shot towards his weapon's grip was telling. "You might have that useless gun at your hip, but I have the power of the void at my fingertips, Rohannan, so keep it civil," Raythe thought. "Yes, I can speak English," Aquilin answered in that language. "Good. Not many of your kind do, or not enough to really converse," Rohannan explained, "and my Katir is a bit limited." In Katir, Elisha cursed, The nerve of this pathetic man. It's not as if we expect humans to learn our language. They hardly lived long enough to even get the basics. Aquiline did not chastise her, though if he had, Raythe guessed their king would have pointed out that her belief was the same as Rohannon's, but on the opposite side of the argument. Instead, Aquiline stated in English, "Sometimes there are more misunderstandings when one speaks the same language, but I will do my best." Rohannon grunted. He took a toothpick from an inner pocket and stuck it into the corner of his mouth. He chewed on it for a moment. "Now that you're here, are you taking charge, King Aquiline? Or are you going to let her idiot father continue speaking for you?" Elisha lunged forward, roaring, "You insolent cur!" "Stop," Aquiline said simply, and she froze. He stared at Rohannon for long, silent moments before he stated, "You wish me to hear your concerns, yet you insult my brother? Would that move you to listen to me if our positions were reversed?" Raythe was rather shocked and pleasantly surprised that Rohannon had marked Veslin for the idiot that he was. Maybe these separatists weren't complete fools. Rohannon shifted the toothpick from one corner of his mouth to the other. With a rather engaging smile, he said, "It might. My brother is an idiot. Anyone who claimed otherwise would be a liar that I wouldn't listen to." Raythe's eyes slid to Aquiline. His best friend's expression was smooth, but Raythe knew that Aquiline had a touch of respect for this plain-speaking separatist. He knew he did. "Just because my father will not do as you wish does not make him an idiot," Elisha hissed, "especially when it is to preserve ruins instead of making a new world. Your world. The new world is your world," Rohannon cut in, his voice surprisingly thick with emotion. The two young men behind him shifted uncomfortably, but Rohannon held up a hand to keep them from reacting further. "Your people, King Aquiline, talk about wanting to preserve our society and our history while you destroy even the memory of it." "But you do not live in those cities," Aquiline pointed out. "You have made your own compound, yes?" Rohannon chewed the toothpick. "Your point?" "That you recognize these cities are no longer appropriate for you to inhabit," Aquiline said. "That's because they're crawling with plants," the young man to Rohannon's right growled. "Damn things grow back faster after you burn them." Rohannon left up a hand to quiet the young man. Then he said, "Your magic is making them uninhabitable for us, King Aquiline." But Aquiline shook his head. "That is not true. There are far more problems than simply the foliage that keeps you from living there. For one, there are no longer enough of you to fill a quarter of the near city. You have no power sources that can sustain it. It is not set up for our magical ones either, even if you would accept them. And, most critically, the rifts open more frequency in former large human population centers than anywhere else. It would not be safe for you to be there." "That's your judgment, not ours." Rohannon shook his head. "These cities cannot be used for their original purpose, nor can they be sustained as museums. It is, in fact, dangerous to continue to allow them to lie fallow." Aquiline stated calmly, "When we reclaim the land, we put more of your great bloody white buildings on it. Drown it all with flowers." Rohannon chewed angrily. Raythe wondered what the Sun Elves would have done to Kendra's cities. He was sure they would find them just as objectionable as the human ones. They'd likely strip them down for parts, too. But something precious would be lost. There's value in history, Raythe thought. Not that he was terribly sentimental, but he had always been a fan of history. That was where many powerful magics were found. Rohannon pointed at the ruined city as explained, "That is proof that humans created great cities, great civilizations with incredible technology. We sculpted the land, we reaped the vast wealth of it and turned it to our purpose. Our kids and our grandkids won't know that from descriptions in a damned book. A few illustrations by your damned RFA scribes who don't even know what they're sketching won't capture who we once were, who we could be again, and all they'll know is your ways and your greatness and how we can't even protect ourselves without your fucking noblesse oblige." The two men with Rohannon nodded their heads and said, "Yeah, damn straight. Trying to race us. Not right. You shouldn't get to decide." Raythe pursed his lips. These were interesting arguments, to be sure, but then there was the cold, hard truth. Humanity could not protect itself, and the RFA had no interest in keeping this world a museum for a few mortal youngsters to gawk at. He was sure that many believed that humans would be better off not remembering the way things had been anyway. He wasn't certain, though, if Aquilin was one of them. But Aquilin did promise these lands to the big houses, Raythe thought with a twist of his lips. They won't let the cities remain. They might not let the separatists either. That will be an interesting moment for all to experience when those two forces collide. His eyes slid to his best friend. Aquilin's gaze was steadily upon Rohannon. He did not appear angry or defensive like Alasha clearly was. Aquilin was intently listening. It was a skill that few leaders had in Raythe's estimation. Normally, leaders thought what they had to say was the only important thing, and others should listen. But Aquilin was nothing like that. "Most of it's already gone. That city sprawled for fucking miles." Rohannon spread his arms as if to explain its size. "Now, it's just a small section of the downtown left. A couple of the skyscrapers. You don't even get a sense of the scale of what it was, but your brother won't even let us keep that much." Aquilin let Rohannon's anguished words sit between them for a long moment. Again, Raythe knew there was truth in what this man said. But that didn't mean the city shouldn't be razed. Having such a ruin so near Tyrael, with all those rifts opening, letting who knew what out of the Underdark, would be a mistake. Aquilin likely understood why Veslin had been so resistant to keeping even a vestige of this place. "You want to hang on to the past," Raythe said, not mockingly, but in empathy. He gave a sad, withered smile. He normally did not speak like this, but he found himself moved to do so. The Kindreth knew what it was like to lose everything and have to begin again. Maybe what they had learned could help these separatists understand. He felt Aquilin's eyes upon him as he said, "You believe that you cannot achieve greatness again if you forget the greatness that came before. But it's not true. There is future greatness. But you can't get there from here by looking back." He felt the warmth of Aquilin's regard for his words. Yes, his king liked him showing empathy to this weathered, worn man, but he doubted what he'd said had reached Rohannon. There was too much fresh hurt and anger deep in the separatist's heart. "You want to infantilize us. You want us to feel we're nothing." Rohannon spat with more "yes" from his crew. "If we forget ourselves, we have only how you see us to define us." "We do not wish that upon you or feel that way about you," Aquilin dissented, but then held up a hand when Rohannon was about to dispute that. "But you clearly believe otherwise." "Because it is otherwise." Rohannon glared at him. Raythe could feel that glare through those dark glasses. "I'm just here to tell you that if you so much as touch that city, there will be hell to pay." "Are you threatening the king?" Raythe's voice was edged even as his smile grew. But just as Rohannon was about to answer him, the 4 horsemen arrived. The leader of this group was a regal-looking man with ebony-colored skin and a bald head. He wore a long, brown suede coat, cut up the back so that it laid neatly on either side of his saddle. The flared collar framed his angular face that was set into an expression of grimness. "In Katir," Alasha explained, "that is General Michael Baston, the one I was telling you about earlier, Uncle." "Yes, I recall," Aquilin said with a brief nod. Raythe observed closely the two very different human leaders. "See that your hearing, Rohannon, is as good as it has ever been. This isn't your time to meet the king," Baston said, his voice low and not quite menacing, but it indicated a man that was used to being respected and obeyed. "Are you arranging his engagements now, General?" Rohannon's voice was higher and had a definite sneer. "Are you a goddamn social secretary for them now?" Baston did not get off his horse, but instead nudged the animal forward, so that he was between them, much like Raythe's electrical wave had been before. The general was willing to protect them with his body, which showed he was brave. He stared down at Rohannon for long, silent moments. Raythe felt the tension build in himself, even though that stare was not aimed at him. "You will remove yourself and these vehicles from the king's path. Emissary Veslin will let you know if King of Aquilin has time to hear your complaints," Baston said, completely ignoring Rohannon's words. "We've said what we had to say," Rohannon retorted. "Come on, boys. We have better things to do than parley here any longer." They all watched in silence as Rohannon and his henchmen entered their foul-smelling vehicles and roared away, ripping up more vegetation under their wheels. It was only when the noise of them was distant and almost gone that General Michael Baston turned to face them. He did not get off his horse, which Raythe thought was quite the power move. Baston was attempting to show them that he was an equal to Aquilin, a representative of humanity, not a vassal. "King Aquilin, it is an honor to meet you. The sun shines brighter when I am in your presence," Baston said in fluid Katir. Raythe lifted an eyebrow. What had Elisha said about humans being unable to master even the basics of their language? "Your light adds to mine, General Baston." Aquilin bowed his head with the formal response. "I hope you don't mind that we switched to English. One of my boys, Findlay, is teaching me Katir, but I am not quite as fluent in it as I would like to be, and fear I will offend," Baston said in English. "But of course," Aquilin responded in English. "I need to practice myself. I hope you will give me some leeway if I make any mistakes." "You likely speak English better than most of the native speakers, myself included, King Aquilin, but I will surely give you whatever grace is needed," Baston said agreeably. "I thank you," Aquilin said, "for this grace and for your intercession." "Though there was no need for it," Raythe added dryly, switching to English too. "Oh, I wasn't protecting you all," Baston said with a slight laugh. "I'm not so blind to humanity's abilities, or lack thereof, to know that those weapons the Separatists carried couldn't harm you, nor could their fists or feet. I wanted to make sure that they didn't get hurt by forgetting that." "You think I would strike out at them?" Aquilin was frowning. Baston's dark-eyed gaze slid to Elisha. She was suddenly studying the ground between her feet very intently. Raythe's eyes narrowed. Had Veslin hurt some of the humans? There had been no such reports, but perhaps Veslin had known better than to put such incidents to paper. "I see," Aquilin finally said as he turned back to the general. "I would speak to you more about how things have been going here in my absence, General Baston." "I'm happy to talk on the way to the Arias Palace," Baston answered. Elisha looked relieved, probably believing that her father could undo any damage Baston could inflict in the short ride to the palace. But that was not to be. "I think I would rather speak somewhere more private," Aquilin said, which had Raythe lifting an eyebrow. "More private than the palace?" Baston looked intrigued. "Yes. A great friend of mine has opened an inn in Tyrrell. It's called the Sudden Dawn," Aquilin said. "Let us go there." Raythe grinned. So there would be wine and danger. He liked nothing better. So we met Duke Rohannon, leader of the 401 and some of the human separatists. What do you think about them? Specifically, do you think that anything the separatists stand for maybe are good points? I mean, it's easy to see the good the RFA are doing for the world, and I definitely get a tingle going down my leg at the thought of magical energy sources that don't pollute.
But imagine our world changed to this one. No more cars, no more internet, no more skyscrapers, no more airplanes. And the more time passes, the more the place looks like Middle Earth instead of our Earth. Can the separatists really save Chicago? Should it be saved? What should be saved? Who gets to write the history books in this case? Let me know what you're thinking about in the comments about this, because it was interesting. I set out to write something that I thought was going to be pretty lighthearted and that the danger and darkness were going to come from the Leviathan. But of course, as I'm writing and really delving into this world, I realized that having elves come and save us and then occupy this place would lead to interesting and difficult conversations and discussions and thoughts about how this was all going to work. And the separatists, at first, I meant them to just be, I don't know, not paper cutouts, but I didn't realize they were going to have as much good points as they have in my own mind. I was like, oh, wait, yeah, this is going to be a problem. What are you thinking when you hear this? And once again, please do like and subscribe. It really makes a difference. It lets YouTube know that this is something worthwhile to share with others. And I'm really looking forward to having a deep, in-depth discussion with you guys about this story, because I really feel like it lends itself to that. And it's definitely something that I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on. Thanks.
Chapter 6. The Sun Rises. Declan was polishing glasses behind the bar as Finley picked his way towards him through the tables. His best friend's long burgundy robe swept over the floor. It was similar to those the Raythe mages wore. Beneath it, Finley had on his usual three-piece suit and bow tie. The magician's hat perched on top of his blonde head, tilted at a jaunty angle no less, was not Raythe style or part of his usual attire, but Finley was partial to wearing it when DMing. A few of the new guests started to chuckle at his best friend's hat, but one sharp glance from Declan had them shutting up and staring into their drinks. "That's better. We've had enough drama tonight," he thought. Finley's large blue eyes met his. They were made larger behind his round, wire-rimmed spectacles. Declan noted that Finley was carrying an empty pitcher and cup, though it was only Snaglack and him at the gaming table this early in the day. The orc was always thirsty. Declan could see the hulking, innocent brute ripping into a chicken leg back at the table. "Snaglack should get his own drinks," Declan said dryly as he took the containers from Finley's hands and went to fill them with foaming, fresh beer. "He's promised to pay for the next round," Finley said as he dug into his own coin purse. "How much do I owe you?" Finley took out a bunch of the bronze, silver, and gold coins that had replaced credit cards and other human currency. King Aquilon's visage was stamped on the gold coins. Even though it had been 5 years since Declan had seen the Sun King in person, he knew that the engraving didn't capture the Raythe's unnatural beauty, grace, and power. He shook himself. The Sun King had been surfacing more often in his thoughts now that he knew the elf was coming back to Tyrael. So what if he does? It's not as if he's going to come into the dawn and order a glass of white wine, Declan reminded himself firmly. He'll stay up at the palace or with his noble retainers. I'll be lucky if I get a glimpse of him from afar. And yet, he found himself looking over at the Dawn's door and expecting to see the real-life version of the elf and the coins. It really was ridiculous. "Maybe I should give you something to cover the whole night," Finley was musing. "I know that Snaglack promised to pay for his next round, but you know how he is." "Don't worry, I'll take care of it," Declan said as he forcefully dragged his gaze from the door. "I have plenty of money, Declan. You don't have to pay for me, let alone Snaglack," Finley protested. "I'm pretty sure you're making more money than I am," Declan laughed. "But you're going to need all your funds when you're at the academy and you can't DM as much this year." Finley pinked with pleasure, likely at Declan's certainty he'd get in. "Yeah, well, I don't want to end up in fairy jail by not paying my fair share of the bar tab." Both of them looked over at the bird cage, where Rain and Snow were just coming to. Declan snorted in amusement. It's a little small for you. When has size ever mattered to you? As I recall, you took down 5 orcs all by yourself, Finley teased. 6. I count Snaglack as part of that bar fight, even though neither of us pulled a punch. But I did best him, Declan grinned. He swore fealty to you. You're his new clan leader, Finley laughed, but then he sobered. You know, it should be you applying to the academy instead of me, or at least with me, Declan. Declan tensed. Finley, hear me out. Finley lifted a hand to fend off all the arguments that Declan routinely put forward. Please? He wasn't mad at Finley for asking. He was glad that his best friend wanted him to share the glory of getting into the academy, but there was absolutely no way he was exposing himself like that in an academy of magic. Finley might think that what he had done to the Leviathan was magical or something, but he was almost certain the Arave wouldn't be as impressed. In fact, they might be alarmed. We've talked about this. I'm not the magical academy sort. I never was one for school anyway, Declan reminded him. Back in high school, while Finley would be poring over his school books with great zeal, the words on the page would blur before Declan's eyes. He'd find himself tapping his pen against the book's spine, then shaking his right leg, then his left. Pretty soon, he would be staring out the window at the trees outside, having forgotten he was supposed to be studying at all. His grades reflected this. When test time came around, Declan would struggle to finish within the prescribed time limit. Often he would just start marking the paper randomly so he could finish early and escape outside. He'd lay down on one of the benches under the shade of a stand of trees in the high school's courtyard, sunglasses on, hood pulled over his face, and wait for the bell to ring and Finley to join him. Being in school was like being in prison to Declan. Sitting still, staring at swirling letters, having the teachers drone on. That was one thing he hadn't missed when the Leviathan came and cut their senior year of high school short. And it also solved the issue of what would happen after high school ended. Finley had been ranked first in their class. He had been applying to Ivy League colleges, which Declan could never have gotten into unless he'd applied to be a janitor there. Yet they'd been determined to stay together, so Finley had been working on a plan to make that happen. But then the Leviathan came, and any plans were well and irrevocably canceled. Yet Finley deserved to be in the best school. He loved learning. He should be at the academy. Finley, studying dusty magical tomes with ink staining his fingers, would make some things right that the Leviathan had made very, very wrong. But would the Arave let him in? Any human who showed a hint of something different about them was suspect, at least from how they treated him, and being as smart and clever as Finley would likely alarm them. His eyes slid to the 2 Arave, a man and a woman who sat at a nearby table. While Finley wasn't able to hear their conversation, he could, and he could understand them perfectly, even though they weren't speaking English. Learning Katir had been the one thing that had been easier for him to do. In fact, Katir was easier for him than English. He'd actually tried to learn Ukrainian back in the day, his native tongue, but it had been gibberish to him. Yet Katir tripped off his tongue as if he'd been speaking it forever. And so what those 2 sun elves were gossiping about was quite clear to him. The male Arave, with golden hair and chocolate-colored eyes, murmured, So it's true then, Lisha. The bartender really is not like the other Vulin? The last was the Arave word for humans, which didn't translate fully in English. The closest approximation would be the magicless, which if Finley had overheard them would have caused his best friend to bristle. Finley would prove them wrong, he was sure. If nothing else, his best friend's zeal for learning would be rewarded with a place by glass scholar Naylor's side. The female Arave with darker tresses and lighter eyes, evidently Lisha, nodded. No, Raythe. I wonder if he is Vulin at all. Declan stiffened. What was this? There had been rumors about him since the Leviathan came. Despite him, Finley, and Gemma all having survived, people seemed to sense that he was the one behind the survival. They were right, but still. Was there something about him that made him stand out? And in this case, stand out so much that they didn't even think he was human? He already knew the answer to their question. There was something off about him, something indefinable, something other. Some would even say it was dark. Maybe he would too. Even his own beloved parents had worried that he'd slip up in some way and be found out. But what would be found out, he wondered. His mind went back to just earlier that day when the sun had nearly done him in. While Finley was quick enough to assume it was some normal, if rare, disease that caused his sun sensitivity, Declan wasn't so sure. In this brave new world of magic and monsters, the only creatures who were affected adversely by the light were from the Underdark, and none of them were considered friendly. He certainly didn't want to be associated with them, no matter what the real cause of his aversion to sunlight. He wondered what these Aravate would make of it. Nothing good. His keen hearing picked up their continuing conversation. He certainly looks like a Vuleen, though he is quite lovely for one, the male Arave named Seath murmured. Declan's eyes narrowed. Sun elves were notorious for their love 'em and leave 'em approach. That was not for him. If he ever were to date someone, let alone become intimate with them, it would be forever. One and done. He couldn't imagine touching someone or letting them touch him and get into his heart and under his skin without having a commitment. The Sun King's face flashed before his mind's eye. He gritted his teeth. He was likely just fantasizing about him because Aquilin was the safest person to fantasize about. He had no chance with such a being, so he would never have to worry about pursuing such a romance or not. Seath continued. It can't be because he put that snotty goblin in his place that you think him other than Vuleen. Oh, that? No, that's nothing compared to what I've heard he's done. Leisha dropped her voice and leaned forward. And what is that? Pray tell. Seath looked disbelieving. Leisha's lips curled into a smile. He killed a Leviathan. Declan's breathing ceased for a moment, but again he forced himself to appear completely unaware of anything they were saying about him. Leisha was wrong anyway. He hadn't killed one Leviathan. He'd killed dozens. So many, really, that he wasn't sure about the end count. 12 hours of battle. Countless shadows burned away, fangs littering the ground all around him, body and mind completely blank except for the battle. And I loved every minute of it. I finally felt like I was myself, like I was doing what I was meant to do. Declan's eyes dropped to the seeming tattoo of a simple kitchen knife that decorated the interior of his left forearm. It was hardly remarkable enough to have been chosen as a tattoo. In fact, he would never have asked for it to be inked on his fair skin. But it was there, whether he wanted it or not. It ached whenever he thought of the Leviathan. They were made of pure darkness with red, glowing eyes. They slithered and flew. They were huge, yet able to slip through the smallest crack. There was nowhere that was safe from them when the sun sank below the horizon, before the Arve had set up the shielded cities. He felt the sharp outline of the blade underneath his skin. He snatched his hand away. His fingertips prickled and cold sweat coated his upper lip. Had he touched it too long? Would it stay as a tattoo or not? Stay a tattoo. Stay, stay, he internally begged. After long moments when nothing happened, he dared to glance down at it again. The tattoo looked as it always had since the day it had appeared. Delicate lines of black detailed every swirl of wood in the handle. The blade was missing the tip, just like the real blade had been after he'd pierced the first Leviathan's side. The rivets that connected the metal to wood were also just as they had been on the real blade, 3 down its length. He could almost remember how cool they were against his palm compared to the warmth of the wood when he'd wielded it. This had been his mother's favorite knife. She'd used it to cut everything from hunks of sharp cheddar cheese for them to snack on, to the carrots she liberally sprinkled into his favorite stew. He'd found it clutched in her ashen hand, slick with her blood, just before she died. As she'd pressed it into his hand, she'd whispered, "They're here for you, Declan. They're here for you." As her last breath had left her, he'd let out a keening howl and sliced his own skin with the blade, mingling her blood with his. He hadn't felt the physical pain. The emotional one was so great that it threatened to consume him, burn him to ashes, leaving only blackened bones in its wake. The cutting of his own flesh had somehow helped him focus that rage and loss into something physical, a stain of crimson on steel. It had felt right. It had felt necessary. "I fear," he'd shouted, a nonsense word, yet he'd screamed it again and again and again until it echoed throughout his house. "I fear!" The Leviathan that had attacked his beloved mother was still in the house, and it appeared like a ghost in front of him, all glowing eyes and inky blackness. There was a suggestion of coils in that darkness, as if it was made up of squirming smoke snakes. It filled the space between the kitchen island and cabinets, from the floor to the ceiling, dwarfing him, blocking out the feeble last rays of sunlight that streamed through the window above the sink. He held the knife out in front of him, rising up onto the balls of his feet, as if he had been knife fighting since a child. He swore he heard it titter as it faced off against him, thinking such a puny, unremarkable blade could do nothing against it. It dove towards him, preparing to engulf him in its blackness, but he slashed it with that simple kitchen knife. The blade glowed white-hot and sliced through the Leviathan like butter. The tip had broken off, but it hadn't mattered. There was a scream, a roar of utter shock and agony. The blue-white light from the blade arced through the Leviathan, cutting it in two. He could see the far wall through the center of it. He leaped and slashed at it again. More arcs of electric blue-white light had streamed through the Leviathan's darkness, destroying it, burning it away. And then the curved fang fell at his feet, a dull clank as the air cleared of darkness. It was just him, his dead mother, and the fang. That was the first Leviathan he would kill that day. There would be many, many more. And the knife that he'd used, that completely unremarkable blade, had disappeared and became a tattoo on his forearm after he was done. He pulled the sleeve of his black jacket down to cover the tattoo. If he didn't stop imagining the real blade, it would appear in his hand, and the Arve, who were gossiping, would notice. Maybe others would too. "Nonsense! Humans can't wield magic or use magical weapons," Raythe repeated the common refrain, but his eyes were filled with alarm at the thought, and Declan gritted his teeth. Would the Arve act the same way when Finley applied to the academy? Normally they viewed humans as if they were children, apt to do silly and dangerous things that they needed to be saved from. They'd likely raise their eyebrows when Finley turned up to take the entrance exam, give him a small smile, and wish him luck, because they would think he needed it. When he passed that test, then things would become more difficult for them, but he hoped they wouldn't treat Finley like some of them did him. "They won't," he thought, "because I've never fit in. I've never belonged. Even kids at school knew I was not one of them." "Exactly. So the bartender is not Pauline." Leisha sat back in her seat and sipped her wine in triumph. Raythe frowned. "So what is he?" And Declan found himself listening with every fiber of his being, as if these gossiping Arve knew anything at all about him. They couldn't, of course. He was just him, whatever that meant. Besides, he was certain he was human. With a cat-like smile, Leisha shrugged. "That's the question now, isn't it?" Declan's shoulders slumped. She didn't know. She had no idea. He should be relieved by this. After all, no matter what she suggested would be wrong, he was human. After all, What else could he be? Declan, you okay? Finley's question brought him back to the moment. He blinked and turned back to his best friend. Yeah, just been a long shift already, and there's still a ton to do. And you were sick before you came to work today. Finley's eyes flickered all over his face as if trying to read his thoughts. That would take it out of anyone. I'm fine now, he quickly retorted. Finley's expression was full of concern. Still, Declan, please tell me that these blasted fairies didn't curse the honey brew. It was Lily Snellgarden's voice that saved him from Finley's questions. He couldn't really lie to his best friend, but he didn't know what was a lie and what was the truth. Afraid so, he said, turning to her with an abashed look. Lily was a halfling with curly red hair and a face splashed with freckles. The top of her head only came up to Declan's waist, but she hustled around the bar as if she was twice his height. Her thick legs were powerfully muscled, and they moved with lightning speed as she hopped up onto the rolling stool behind the bar, which allowed her to whiz up and down the bar's length to make drinks, take coins, and mop up. She was right in front of the silver keg, sniffing it and wrinkling her nose. Ach, it's already starting to stink. She waved a hand through the air. Yeah, I was going to take it in the back and dump it in the sink, he told her as he handed the full pitcher and cup to Finley. Better get that to Snaglack before he dies of thirst. I'll check up on you guys a little bit. Finley's large blue eyes studied his face, clearly wanting to discuss that afternoon's weakness of his. But thankfully, his best friend smiled and nodded. Sounds good. I want to run the final campaign by you. For sure. Declan nodded and watched with affection as Finley carried the nearly overflowing pitcher and cup to the gaming table. He was pleased to note that Snaglack got up to intercept Finley before he gotten halfway back to take both from him. He and Snaglack made eye contact. The big orc dipped his head in acknowledgement. Declan had no need for any followers, let alone an orc one, except for the fact that Snaglack could guard Finley when he couldn't. He needed to deal with that keg and fill Lily in on all the doings at the bar, not to mention things were heating up again. He was certain tonight was going to be another full house and then some. So Snaglag needed to keep an eye on Finley. That head dip had told Declan he would. With a final wipe of his hands in a bar towel, he headed over to Lily and the keg. She was attempting to lift the keg up, but was not succeeding. Lily, what are you doing? Declan frowned. This thing stinks to high heaven. Lily's cheeks were flushed from trying to lift the keg that weighed almost as much as she did. I'll handle it, he said, as he lightly picked up the keg and hefted it onto his right shoulder. I'll dump it out in the back sink real quick. But Lily was shaking her head. Don't you remember what happened last time we did that? The curse will spread to the rest of the liquor. That only happened that once, and Helgrim will already be upset that he's lost some of his best brew for Aquilon's arrival. We can't risk losing any more. There's no more alcohol to be had for love or money in the province, Lily reminded him. Declan knew that too. In addition to all the other high fantasy creatures, the Sun Elves took every opportunity they could to have a party. They were partial to the minerally tasting icy white wines that were produced in what had been California. With King Aquilon's decision to move into the Arias Palace in Tyrell now that the war against the Leviathan was won, the celebrations would stretch out weeks, if not a month or more, to mark the occasion. So all the alcohol fit to drink was likely already long sold and gone. The Sun Elves reminded Declan of the ancient Romans and their attitudes. They lusted after fine food and wine, adored dancing and singing, and were said to make love at the drop of a hat. Declan had served them enough food and drink, not to mention finding many of them intertwined between the beer barrels and back, to know all of that was true. Their battle to free Earth from the Leviathan menace had been unusual for them. Though brilliant magic users and skilled with the sword and bow, the taking of life, even foul life like that of the Leviathan, was not their natural state. They were elves of peace, not war. But the Leviathan's emergence on Earth had changed many things for many people. Right. Gotta take it outside, he said, his voice strangely dead-sounding. Except it wasn't strange, because outside was where the sun was, and the last thing he wanted was to feel those rays on his skin again. Dump it in the sewer down the block. Would that work? She nodded vigorously once more. I'd take it myself, but it's Wee bit heavy for me. Don't worry about this, Lily. I'll take care of it, Declan said, still sounding off to his own ears. She reached up and pinched his cheek. You're the best, Declan. You take all the tips tonight for covering for me earlier and doing this now. No worries. It's no big deal. Just a quick walk down the block, he said, trying to convince himself as much as convince her. I'll hold down the fort while you're gone, Lily assured him. And don't you worry. I'll make it clear to Helgrim that you had to sacrifice the honey brew. Thanks, Lily. He reached back and twitched the deep hood of his black, loose-fitting jacket up over his head so that it completely shaded his face. It was already 4 in the afternoon, so the sun would be lower on the horizon than it had been when he'd come here. There would be plenty of shadows he could take shelter in if he needed them. Yet the sun was staying up higher later as spring was turning to summer. It would soon be terribly bright. But he was human, and humans were afraid of the light. It was fine. Everything was fine. Lily was already rocketing down to the other end of the bar to serve another halfling some rich red wine. He turned quickly and started towards the side door that would lead him more swiftly to the storm sewer. His eyes darted to Finley. His best friend's head was down as he was writing furiously in his game notebook. Do I want him to notice I'm going outside? Or do I hope he doesn't? If Finley noticed him leaving, his best friend might come with him, just to make sure he was all right. And the sun was too much for him, and he wasn't all right, then no, he couldn't think like that. It was a block walk in the late afternoon. He wasn't a child. This wasn't dangerous. It wasn't. Everything would be fine. He fished into the inner pocket of his jacket and took out his sunglasses. He flipped them open and stuck them on. Even in the dim golden light of the dawn, he saw perfectly behind the darkest pair of sunglasses he had been able to find in the ruins of old Lightwell. He braced himself, taking in a deep breath as he pushed open the wooden side door and went outside. He immediately felt the sun's scorching rays at the top of his heavy hood. His eyes squinted and watered painfully the moment he was free of the shadow of the inn. He swallowed and forced himself to keep walking, even as everything in him begged him to return to the safety of the inn with its small, stained glass windows and dim interior. But humans were not afraid of the light. He was human, so he would be fine. He started walking down the street that bore little resemblance to the town he'd grown up in. The boxy ranch houses and multi-story Victorians had been destroyed in the original battle and had been replaced with the elegant and magically created architecture of the Raythe. Graceful white stone homes with delicate glass domes were everywhere. Corinthian columns held up the soaring ceilings of spacious buildings, and vast plazas dotted the sprawling town where people could perambulate with a cup of aromatic tea or icy wine in one's hand. And all of it was overflowing with flowers and greenery. Life bursted, bloomed, and flowed in Tyrrell, and the smell of those flowers and growing things filled Declan's nostrils with sweet scents as he made it to the sidewalk. The asphalt streets were long gone, replaced with perfectly level stone walkways, for there were no cars any longer. They were not allowed inside the shield in any case. The separatists might still run the belching, gas-guzzling cars and trucks that were slowly rusting and falling apart, but to live under the auspices and greater safety of the Raythe Empire was to eschew all that polluted and contaminated and embrace the magical. The storm sewer was located half a block downstream from the squat but comfortable Dawn. The inn's use of dark wood, round windows, and curving doors was quite a bit different from the light and airy Raythe structures about it. But the dwarves prided themselves in bringing their own flavor to the town, and the Dawn was a favorite with all species. The dwarves' home in the Underdark had been lost to the Kindreth long ago, and they had joined the Empire then. Seeing that they had assimilated so well gave the general hope that humanity would too, but Declan wondered if that was true. The dwarves lived long and used the magic of the earth. Humans were truly the odd one out. That block walk from the inn to the storm sewer felt like a marathon. Cold sweat ran down Declan's spine as he dropped the keg down to the ground and crouched beside it right next to the metal grate. He could hear water rushing far below. He imagined the cool darkness that water flowed through and wished bitterly to experience it himself. He rested one forearm against the top of the keg as he struggled to catch his breath. His left hand was far more exposed to the sunlight when he did that. Though his flesh did not smoke or blacken, it felt like it was. Those few moments of full exposure made it feel as if flames were running along his skin. He cursed himself for not bringing the pair of supple black leather gloves that Shonda had given him for his birthday. He knew exactly where they were, neatly folded on top of his dresser at home. He had considered grabbing them earlier this afternoon, but it was almost summer and too warm for them. People would have stared and wondered what he was on about wearing those. But he'd been foolish to worry about that kind of heat and attention. He wrenched his sleeves down further to cover all but the tips of his fingers. Everything will be fine. Just have to open the keg and let it drain, he told himself. His fingers, suddenly clumsy and numb, fumbled with the metal spigot at the bottom of the keg. He let out a low cry of frustration as he couldn't quite seem to get the spigot open. His body shook with cold despite being out under the hot sun. There's no need to panic. This will only take a moment. Everything will be fine. The spigot finally turned, and the honey brew, definitely sour and stinking, started to flow out into the drain. He let out a sigh of relief. He could wait for it to empty in the shadows of a nearby tree. Just a few feet away, he saw the edges of one of those shadows, lacy and soft, but it would offer some respite. He reached towards it, only to see the shadow retreat. What the hell? It was getting brighter. As bright as noon. But that shouldn't be. That couldn't be. He looked up at the sky in confusion as the light increased and pushed back all the shadows. The light was flooding everything, pure golden sunshine. His tongue clove to the top of his mouth that was dry as dust. This light. He'd seen it before. One time. 5 years before, nearly to the day. It had spelled safety back then. The light had blown the Leviathan apart. It had eventually saved the world. But now? Now? The light of the Raythe extinguished all shadows, conquered the darkness. It left nowhere for those afraid of its brilliance to hide. Sun King Aquilin Fairlin had come home to Tyrael, and Declan Wilde was trapped in his light. In this chapter, we really get to see how Declan is different from other humans, through Seath and Leisha's eyes especially. Up to when I became an adult, and even after that, I've pretty much been an outsider. I might be able to pass as a normie until I open my mouth, but I know I've got a lot of weird and wonderful inside. But when I was younger, I didn't find that weird all that wonderful. But now I've embraced it and I'm sharing it with you. Yeah, and anyone else who happens upon this YouTube channel. So I make a lot of my characters outsiders too, because that's where I feel most comfortable writing from. We all know that being different from the mainstream can be dangerous, literally. Declan is pretty damn sure that people who love the sun are going to be suspicious of someone who can't stand out in it, and he's definitely not wrong about that. We're going to see how that all works out. Are you an outsider? And what has been good and bad about that experience for you? For me, the good part is that it inspired me to write, and therefore, ironically, to connect with a hell of a lot more people than I ever would have if I had hidden my weirdness from the world. But it also means that I'm often in my head, I'm exquisitely uncomfortable around new people or even large groups. I've had to be very okay being on my own, like building my castle and my moats and my walls and all this kind of stuff to appear normal and just not let social anxiety crush me. How about you? How has being an outsider affected your life? I'm really curious how people have dealt with that, and how do you still feel about it now? Again, please do like and subscribe to the channel. Recommend it to your friends if you think anyone else would like it too. I think this has been like a lot of fun. I know personally it's been a lot of fun on my end hearing all your thoughts and what's going on with you guys. I'm looking forward to talking more in depth. Chapter 7. The Shadow Appears. Elisha, would you be so kind as to head to the Arias Palace and let Veslin know that I will not be arriving before sunset this evening? Aquilin asked his niece. Her eyes flickered between him and Baston as she said, Uncle, I think I should remain. You should do what the king commands you to do. Raythe cut in with a dark look at her, which so rarely appeared on his handsome face. He thinks Veslin has done something against the humans too. Ackland thought. Some violence. Ackland didn't know if he wanted to curse his elder brother for abusing his position or himself for letting Veslin have the opportunity to abuse it. Uh, of course, I will. Uh, when will you arrive at the palace, uncle? Elisha asked as she took the reins of her horse. I do not know, he answered. So cancel everything that you and Veslin have arranged. I will set my own schedule when I arrive. Her cheeks burned and she lowered her head. Yes, uncle, it will be as you say. Commander Severin, you and the rest of the protectors shall accompany Lady Fairlin. Perhaps you would like to send your people with them as well, General. Ackland suggested the latter to Baston. Elisha opened her mouth to object, undoubtedly to say something about how humans would add nothing to her protection, but she wisely shut it without speaking. My king, perhaps myself and a few of the protectors should stay with you, Severin began, but it was Raythe who stopped him. Severin, I'm here. Nothing will happen, especially not with the sun so bright and Tyrael so peaceful, Raythe assured the commander. Severin hesitated a moment, but then nodded. He knew Raythe's fighting prowess, having been saved by it many, many times. Everything will be fine, Commander Severin. Please get the protectors to the palace so that they might rest and recover, Ackland added. While he might have no desire to set foot there at this moment, the battle mages were exhausted and deserved to go home. Home. Is Arya's palace to be my home? The shadow will be there. Another nod and smile from the commander. Thank you, Your Majesty. You should join them, Sergeant Amory. Bring Lee and Jacobs with you, Baston said to the 3 soldiers with him. Unlike Rahannan's people, Amory and Lee were women, while Jacobs was a man. They all saluted smartly and rode their horses over to where Elisha was hopping up onto her saddle. The 3 of them watched as the others rode off towards Tyrael without looking back. Aquilin was certain that Elisha was going to breathlessly tell Veslin what had happened and beg her father for forgiveness. But it wasn't Elisha who had failed in ferrying him to a place where Veslin thought he could control things. It was Aquilin's failure for ever allowing Veslin to think he had any say over Aquilin at all. Aquilin lightly mounted Arendriel, and Raythe did the same with Silveril. The 3 of them started at a brisker pace towards the city. Perhaps it hadn't been the thought of politics or the shadow that had caused him to delay his arrival. Maybe it had been Veslin all the time. Now he wished to get to Tyrael and sort out what had been happening in his absence. General Baston, as I'm sure you're aware, I wished us to have a plain discussion, Aquilin said, without artifice or the need to shade our words based on who could overhear us. Baston nodded. I did get that. Lord Raythe Nares is my most trusted advisor and constant companion. His discretion is unmatched, so you may say anything in front of him that you would just to me, Aquilin told him. Raythe grinned. Secrets die with me, General. Andy. Baston's dark eyes slid to Aquilin as a faint smile played on his lips. I have to say that I am glad you are open to such a conversation. Your brother has found little call to discuss anything with me, plainly or otherwise. I've had certain reports from my brother, Veslin, but as in all things, that is only half the story, possibly less. Aquilin added the last with a bitter twist of lips. I would hear the rest from you. Emissary Veslin is dealing with various factions whose needs and wants are not perfectly aligned, Baston said generously. Hell, some of them are directly opposed. And how has he handled them? Aquilin asked, then added as he remembered his own stricture to speak plainly. Has there been any violence used against humanity? Baston grimaced. Close, but both sides have backed off, officially anyway. Officially, Raythe focused on that word as did Aquilin. While there have been no violence between guards and human citizens or the separatists, there have been growing instances of altercations between humans and other species generally. Further, I've heard reports of humans being barred from stores run by other species, Baston explained, his expression darkening. Prejudice is growing. These things are done by citizens, not officials of any sort. Yet these crimes are not looked into carefully, and I've yet to see any of the perpetrators punished by anything but slaps on the wrist. If that. I see. Ackland's hands tightened on the reins. If such acts are tolerated, they flourish and grow. Like weeds in a flower bed, Baston agreed with a nod. I've brought those concerns to Emissary Veslin, but he has not seen it my way. He believes I am exaggerating, and that humanity must simply adapt to the ways of this new world, where we are on the bottom and others are on the top. Of course he thinks that, Raythe muttered. Aquilin knew he had rolled the dice by giving his brother power here. He had hoped, foolishly, that his elder brother would behave differently, but Veslin viewed even other Arave who might or might not have too much Kindreth blood as lesser beings. What should he have expected Veslin to view humans as? Mortal and without magic, they likely appeared as grubs to his elder brother. I thought he would behave differently. For me, that is the truth of it, he thought. This will be addressed. The guilty will be punished, and a message will be sent, Aquilin stated firmly. Baston cast him a curious look. Forgive me, King Aquilin, but I'm used to a democracy, where leaders have to bargain to get other parts of the government to act. But I suppose as a king you do not. What you say goes. The Radiant Council has some say in limited matters, such as war, but my word is law for the most part, Aquilin said. I see. Well, I look forward to witnessing this particular law change, Baston said. He chewed his inner cheek before continuing. But there's more I'm hoping you can assist with, but it might even be beyond a king's power. Oh, what? Baston let out a breath through his lips. I think it is easy to believe what is best is what is wanted and will solve all problems. But sometimes it will just cause more. Meaning we should not reclaim the ruins, Aquilin gasped. But Baston shook his head, which surprised him. They're going to be reclaimed, whether or not your magic hastens the progress. We can't maintain them. We can't live in them. To keep them is a waste of land and resources. And, as you so wisely pointed out, the Leviathan anchored many of their rifts in these locations, so they are not safe either. So what do you mean, General? Raythe asked. Baston smiled thinly. It's the bigger issue that Emissary Veslin has been missing. The anger and hurt over the ruins are but a symbol of what's truly wrong. I believe some of the prejudice that humanity is seeing is another symptom of it. You see, you might have saved humanity from the Leviathan, but you haven't yet made a place for us in this new world of yours. Aquilin frowned. I do not understand. Are the stipends not sufficient for your people to live well? Then he remembered Elisha's words about Baston wanting human soldiers to assist in fighting Leviathan. But even if there were enough humans that he could in good conscience risk their lives, Leviathan could only be killed by magic, which humans could not wield or use in any way. Somehow, I have a feeling that the general is going to tell you that the stipends are the problem, but not because they're too much. Raythe chuckled sadly. The humans want to work for their money, right, General? Humans want to be part of society, Lord Nereus. An equal part. That means being able to get a job and make sufficient funds to support themselves without a handout, which is not something many humans are able to do right now, Baston explained. My two boys are prime examples of humans having to fight and scrape in order to get even the most basic of positions. You have two sons? Aquilin asked. Baston beamed, clearly proud of them. They're not mine by blood, but in every way that counts, they are my children, and I could not be prouder of them. Ah, you adopted them after the war, Aquilin guessed. Such adoptions had been a common occurrence, as many human parents had died. Many children had died too, but those who had survived had been placed with families like Baston's. My wife and I did, though they were already adults when the war broke out. But they saved our daughter's life. Finley, Declan, and Gemma were the only 3 survivors of the Battle of Lightwell, King Aquilin, Baston explained. I fear. The word echoed in Aquilin's mind. Aquilin's heart skipped a beat. The Shadow was the general's adopted son? He would meet the young man again for certain. It would not be some chance encounter on the street, but something that would be planned. Baston was the leader of the humans. He and Aquilin would be thrust together many times, and the Shadow, was it Finley or Declan, would be a part of that. He licked suddenly dry lips. What will you say when we meet, Shadow? Aquilin thought, but then he answered his own question. You will say nothing. I am making more of that moment than he ever has. Ah, yes, I recall them. I saw them that day. Aquilin finally got out. Yes, they saw you too. Baston chuckled, completely unaware of Aquilin's surging heart rate, though Raythe gave him a strange glance. Declan and Finley protected my dear Gemma against the Leviathan for 12 hours. He remembered that kitchen knife in the Shadow's hand. How could that have protected them? Impossible. Forgive me, General, but the only thing that saved them that day was luck, Raythe pointed out. As I'm sure you're well aware, none of your weapons can harm the Leviathan. Not to take anything away from those 2 young men's actions, yet you would do that by assigning their lack of survival to luck. Baston's voice was crisp. But I know that they killed the Leviathan. Declan did anyway. Declan. Declan is the Shadow, Aquilin thought, suddenly sure of it. How? Raythe's brow furrowed, clearly still perplexed. I don't know, Baston said after several long moments. But you said they haven't told me, and I haven't asked. I won't ask. Baston caught in before Raythe could inquire further. But Declan fought the Leviathan with Finley at his side, and kept them all safe until King Aquilin arrived and his light vanquished the rest of them. Aquilin remembered Declan standing there staring at him with those eyes filled with awe and disdain. Despite what Raythe had said, despite what Aquilin himself knew about humans and magic, Aquilin was certain that Declan had fought that night, fought long and hard against an overwhelming enemy until they were all dead. I fear, the word echoed in his mind. Why won't they speak of their triumph? Raythe asked, clearly flummoxed by this lack of pride in their kills. His best friend was often a tad bit overzealous in discussing his. He'd go into great detail, describing his kills with relish. The more dangerous, the more daring, the more zeal filled his voice as he regaled everyone with them. Many were surprised at what they saw as his bloodthirstiness, because he was so easygoing in all other ways. Sometimes Aquilin believed his best friend got out all his aggression through these battles so that he could be so easygoing. He wondered what would happen now that the war was over and that release would no longer be there. They saw all their friends and family killed, Lord Nerys, Baston answered grimly. Many people have become emotionally unbalanced since the Leviathan's first attack and the remaking of the world 5 years ago. Some have even gone completely mad and run into the rifts that randomly rip open the air around them. They've embraced the death that they had eluded before. So you don't speak of it for fear of generating an emotional harm? Aquilin asked softly. Yes, Baston answered firmly. Then his jaw muscles clenched and released. Though it would help me in my own quest to prove that humanity can fight that much easier if we did. But I won't risk my boy's mental health over it.
Raythe lifted his eyebrows at Ackland, clearly thinking that this was the general's fancy and not the truth. But Raythe wasn't there when I saw the shadow. I had sent him to lead other battle mages elsewhere, so I cannot blame him for doubting the general's words. But back to my greater point. Declan managed to secure a bartending position at the Sudden Dawn Inn, one of the only humans to do so, despite it being a service job that should be accessible to many more of my kind. Granted, he's able to control crowds better than most, but still, he should not be the only human bartender in town. Baston was smiling again as he spoke of one of his sons. I'm impressed, Raythe chuckled. Dwarven taverns are not for the faint of heart. No, but Declan can't handle himself. If you'd seen him take down 6 orcs like I did, now you really are pulling our legs, General. 6 orcs? Raythe laughed, more delighted by the lie than offended. Humans weren't strong or fast or anything, really, compared to other species, especially to orcs, who could crush skulls with their bare hands, so Aquilin was lifting an eyebrow too, but Baston did not even crack a smile. Yes, 6. By himself. He conked one over the head with a chair, he recounted, miming some of Declan's actions. He disarmed another before knocking that orc unconscious with his own hammer. He snapped the 3rd one's leg. He smashed the 4th one's head into a wall. There's still a mark where it happened. The 5th he slammed with a 2-footed kick through the front door. Raythe's mouth was hanging open in evident shock and even more amusement. But Aquilin was not amused. He could almost see the shadow moving just like that, with ease and deadly precision. And the 6th? Raythe asked. You've only gone through the fate of 5, dear General. Ah, the 6th. Having seen his brethren dispatched so thoroughly, he set down his weapons and asked to join Declan's clan. Here Baston grinned fondly. Oh, you tickle me, General. Raythe laughed delightedly. A human with an orc follower? I thought Snaglak would be angry, tent on revenge for Declan's complete and utter victory over his clanmates. But Snaglak gave Declan a toothy grin and clapped his hands together in delight at Declan's martial mastery. Baston told him. He called Declan a powerful leader and pledged to join him and do whatever he says. And he has. You actually saw this fight? Raythe goggled. I did, the general nodded. But don't take my word for it. Both my boys and Snaglak will be at the dawn. You can ask them yourselves what happened. Declan will likely downplay his prowess, but Snaglak will detail it for you with sound effects. The last had Baston wincing, as if those sound effects had been very loud. I cannot wait to meet your boys, General. Raythe slapped his right thigh in glee. They sound marvelous. Don't you think so, Aquilin? Aquilin found himself nodding stiffly. The shadow, Declan, he reminded himself, would be just the sort of warrior to fight like that, to fight to the end against impossible odds and not to stop. I fear. Well, if Declan is as resourceful as you say, no wonder he is a bartender for Helgrim. Raythe continued in his happy way. That dwarf has high standards. Yes, and my other son, Finlay, is as clever as Declan is strong and fast. He's preparing to take the entrance exam for the Taranth Academy of Magic and the Arcane Arts, Baston said, puffing his chest out. He has learned so much of your history and skills that he has created a role-playing game around it all. It's quite accurate from what people tell me. He's the one who's teaching me Katir. Raythe was blinking. Ah, Finlay thinks he's going to be accepted into the academy? But humans have no magic, General. Aquilin found himself saying stupidly. He will pass the entrance exam, which requires no magical ability, I believe. Baston answered without doubt. That is all that is required to attend the academy. If he is not admitted, then it will all but prove my greater point, that while you saved us from extinction, you have not made a place for us. Prejudice is rampant, as I've stated. Few people will hire humans for jobs that they can clearly do. None whatsoever have been allowed into your academies. Most are expected to simply do nothing with their lives, and
simply accept their lot as second-class citizens. Doing nothing is quite glorious, in my humble opinion, General. I'm rather looking forward to all the nothing I shall be doing now that the Leviathan are back in their holes, Raythe said as he tossed his wild mane of dark hair over his shoulder. Yes, but when all of your time can be filled with leisure, then it loses its spark, and people lose hope, Baston explained. Humans need to be integrated into the world more, King Aquilin, not just for our sake, but for society's. Your brother barely tolerates us, and he does not think that humans have anything to offer. But that simply isn't true. A mortal's perspective can help some of the gridlock that is developed in your government, among many other things. And you feel my brother is not giving humanity that chance? Aquilin asked. He isn't interested in doing so, Baston qualified. Think of it as mostly benign, and some malignant neglect. In the human world, before all this happened, we found that diversity of people, experiences, backgrounds, and more led to a far more vibrant and successful society overall. It was the malignant aspects Baston had mentioned that Aquilin was most concerned about. He knew there was more of that than the general knew or would say. I will think about what you have said, General, Aquilin answered evenly. Do not think too long, King Aquilin. Our lives are brief compared to yours, and any delay can impact generation after generation, Baston counseled. They had passed into Tyrrell's outskirts when the discussion had started. Now the general had them turning down a broad avenue, graced with many large trees that had been magically quickened after the war. They now looked like they had been there for 100 years, still terribly young, but settled. While the avenue was lovely and spacious with the scent of flowers perfuming the air, Aquilin found himself tensing up the deeper they moved into Tyrrell. He knew they would reach the inn at any moment, and inside would be the shadow. Declan, he corrected, but such a normal name didn't suit the shadow. Unless it does, and I have built him up into something he is not. I must be rational about all of this, he chided himself. But he found his eyes constantly roving around, as if looking for the young man, and that was how he actually found him. The shadow was collapsed on the ground near a keg that was opened and draining its contents into a sewer. He was mostly covered with a long hooded black jacket, but his face was turned to the side, and Aquilin would recognize that visage anywhere. It was not the meeting that he had imagined in any way, for the shadow, for Declan, was crawling towards the thin shadows cast by the nearby trees. His fingers dug desperately into the earth as he dragged himself forward. Declan, my God, what's wrong? What happened? The general cried as he leaped off of his horse and ran to the young, slender figure. Are you injured? Are you sick? Light. So bright. Need darkness. Declan wheezed weakly. Declan cried out in agony when the general tried turning him on his back and exposed his face to the light. The young man turtled in on himself, seeking darkness above all else. Aquilin jumped off of his horse and moved to join the general. He'd been so stunned by seeing the shadow that he'd been shocked into immobility for a moment, but now he felt almost as much alarm as the general was experiencing. To his surprise, Raythe made no such move. As he rushed past his best friend, he glanced up and saw the strangest expression on Raythe's handsome face. First, there was shock, utter and complete shock, and then Raythe's lips writhed back from his teeth, and he was glaring at Declan as if his sheer existence angered him, enraged him. The expression was gone so quickly, though, that he believed he must have been mistaken. Why would Raythe be angry at a young man he'd never met? But the thought fled as he crouched down by Declan's side. What is the matter? Has he ever been ill like this before? Aquilin asked as his hands glowed with golden light. No, never. Declan's as healthy as a horse. I've never seen him even catch a cold, Baston explained as he gripped one of Declan's shoulders. Concern was carved into his ebony face. Death and loss had been so severe during the war for humanity, Aquilin guessed that to see someone even ill was to be thrown back into those dark times.
He moved his hand swiftly over the curled-up form of the young man. His magical senses detected no wounds, but Declan's whole body was convulsing. He was suffering, that was clear, even if Aquilin couldn't identify the cause. The light. Raythe's voice rose up behind him, deeper than usual. He glanced over his shoulder at his best friend. What? He mentioned the light. Raythe answered, his expression so studiously neutral as to be alarming. Looks like he was draining that fairy-cursed beer when the light became too much for him. Get him inside and he should be fine. Light? Why would that? Aquilin frowned as he turned back to the young man, who was literally hiding every part of his skin from the sunlight. Whatever the reason, Declan clearly was light-sensitive and suffering from exposure. Let's get him inside. Declan, can you walk? Baston asked. No need for that, General. I can carry him, Aquilin said as he easily lifted the young man into his arms. Declan was not small, but he felt light to Aquilin. Declan didn't unturtle himself, but cringed further down into Aquilin's arms, turning his front so that he could bury his head against Aquilin's chest. If he could have crawled inside of Aquilin's armor, the king guessed he would have. The inn is just there, Baston said as he jumped to his feet and pointed towards a low, dark wood building a block away. Raythe, take care of the horses. We'll meet you inside, Aquilin said as he briskly started carrying Declan towards the homely dwarven structure, with Baston racing after him. As they neared the entrance to the dawn, he realized that the shadow was murmuring something over and over again. He caught part of what Declan said. You. Of course, it would be you. Have you ever realized that you are not on the same page as someone in your family or a good friend or even a work colleague, where you realize that what they are doing is the opposite of what you stand for, even what you deeply believe in? We're getting hints here that Aquilin and his older brother Veslin are definitely not on the same page when it comes to humanity. And yet Aquilin named Veslin as emissary because, this was his older brother and he loves him and he wants to give him a place in his regime and all this kind of stuff. But is this going to bite him in the ass, basically? I drew inspiration for this relationship from one I actually had with my grandmother. I adored her as a child. I can tell you I have these wonderful memories of going to her apartment in Chicago, making streusel cake with her, going to the flea markets and buying like little toys and things with her. She was someone that I just thought ruled the heavens and the earth. And then I grew up and my father remarried someone who was Jewish, and my grandmother's virulent anti-Semitism came out. It was shocking. It was horrific. It was really something that I just couldn't ignore, nor should I have ignored, but sometimes we do. But it totally changed my perception of her. And in the end, I ended up cutting her off because she would not acknowledge that her hatred was just, it was just wrong. Ironically, I was not close with my stepmother. I wasn't fond of her for other reasons, but it was something that I just couldn't stand by and allow to go on and be a part of. Have you ever been in such a position with family or friends? What did you do? Do you see how this is going to go badly for Aquilin and Veslin? Anyway, if in the comments, please do like and subscribe as we're talking about these really sort of like important in-depth issues, because I want to make sure that you get the next chapter and we get to have this conversation and it all keeps going. Thank you guys so much for your thoughtfulness and all of your replies. It's been really amazing to hear more from you and learn more about you. I hope you feel the same. Take care.
Chapter 8. Pride and Prejudice. Earlier.
You think this is over? You think you've defeated me and saved the Adamantine Empire?
Ikut Grieffinger the ghoul gasped as black blood frothed on her rotten lips. Her clawed right hand pressed against a hideous gash in her side. More blood pooled around her fallen form. But despite the nearness of her demise, She was smiling and let out a cackling laugh. You fools! He is coming. The Night King, Zelroth Vex, is coming! Just the name caused the shadows to grow darker. Silence fell over the battlefield, as if even the dead were waiting to see if pronouncing his name would make the dread Kindrith King appear. Would glowing, ruby-colored eyes flash in the darkest reaches of the cavern? Would hair like a waterfall of silver silk swirl in the cold wind? Would skin, pale as the moon, give him a ghostly radiance? And would the familiar taste of ozone fill the air from the massive amounts of magic that swirled around him like a cloak of stars? None who had stood before the Night King had lived to tell the tale. Would the same be true of these heroes? Finley tapped his pen against the journal where he'd written those words and sighed. The scene would go something like that. Of course, his players would, unwittingly for the most part, derail his carefully detailed plans. For example, they'd likely cut off Iket's head before she could say a word, let alone the speech he'd written. He'd need a backup plan, which would allow the ghoul to speak, even with a severed head. But what if they crushed her skull under a boot? That would put a kibosh on the talking thing from her body in any case. He would need a backup plan for the backup plan. Maybe Vex could summon her ghost to speak? Yeah, that sounded good. That would mean a direct connection between Vex and Iket. The assumption would be that the Night King had been watching the heroes' progress and measuring their worthiness to be his foes before he made his grand entrance. But would this whole death scene be dramatic enough? And would it really capture the full dread of Zelroth Vex? It was hard, in general, to synthesize lore into a moment, to introduce a character of such importance and get across everything one wanted to in a few lines. But go on too long, and it would not work either. But there was simply so much to Vex. The Night King had started as a hero, after all. The fact that he ultimately became a dark god, well, that just made him all the more interesting to Finley and an excellent antagonist. More Darth Vader than Darth Sidious. An arc, a tragic past, the possibility of redemption? He'd have to think about this. It was his need to find out more about Vax that had spurred Finley to go to the Guardian's Athenaeum, or the library in human parlance, even though he'd had to get glass scholar Neldor Lorave's permission to look at any of the books. He and Neldor had a history. I told him what I saw through one of the rifts, and he pitied me. A scared human who claimed to have glimpsed the fabled Kindred city of Illithor. His sad little smile as he said I was mistaken said it all. Yeah, real history there between us, Finley thought. The irritating thing was that Finley admired Neldor. He'd used the Glass Scholar's many works as the basis for most of his research for his games. Neldor's clear, concise language made history accessible. Finley had gotten lost in his Mysteries of the Forgotten Realms, an 1,000-page tome that he literally could not put down, even when the sheer weight of it had cut off circulation to his thighs. But there was no mutual respect, and he'd feared what Neldor would say when he asked to check out books regarding the Night King. Finley, the library is for everyone, Gemma had pointed out as she tugged on his arm to lead him towards the front desk where Neldor actually sat. The Sun Elf was the head of the academy, but it had been last summer when Finley had made to brave the library and the academy was on break. Evidently, though he was the most important person in RFA scholarship, Neldor did not think it beneath himself to man the front desk, which was yet another reason that Finley admired him. Neldor didn't behave as if any act involving scholarship was too insignificant. Maybe if we just wait until someone else takes over for the Glass Scholar, that would be a better idea, Finley had responded and had prepared to exit the soaring, golden-domed entryway to the Guardian's Athenaeum before Neldor noticed them. But, despite being just 12 years old at the time, Gemma held him firmly where he was. Nope, that could be hours from now or never. He could be here until the library shuts for the night, I'll come tomorrow and lose a whole 24 hours? I think not. You have a game to prepare for. Gemma gave him a hard stare that was eerily reminiscent of the one her mother Shonda gave politicians who stood in her way. They all quailed before her, and Finley was man enough to admit that he was quailing before her preteen daughter. If only we still have the internet, right? You would think the RFA would agree having information easily accessible by anyone would be a plus, Finley said. He still missed the weight of his iPhone in his pocket, the smooth slide of his finger over the silky glass, and the thought that nearly every single bit of human knowledge was accessible from the palm of his hand. But no more. The internet, like everything else in the modern human world, was gone. Sandy told me that the separatists are working on something, an intranet, if nothing else. Something that they can all access locally, Gemma said with a shrug. Really? He blinked. Wait, do Michael and Shonda know about that? Gemma rolled her eyes at him, hard. If Sandy knows, then yes, our parents know. Yeah, I phrased that badly. I mean, do they think it's going to work? I'm sure they're both keeping an eye on it, but probably not, she admitted. Just keeping the lights on for a few hours takes most of the separatists' resources, so I doubt it will work long term. You aren't thinking of sneaking into Lowtown again, he asked. Me? She narrowed her eyes at him. I believe it was you who wanted cotton candy the last time we went. Yeah, they had the pink kind, hard as a rock, stale as can be, but still so good, he sighed with remembered pleasure. Don't think that talk of cotton candy is going to get me off track, Finley. Her eyes were on her hips now, which despite her slender frame made her seem even more formidable. You're going to speak to the glass scholar. Now march. But he doesn't like me. Finley flapped his arms. Gemma blinked at him. Does that matter? Surely he won't bar you from looking at some books, simply because he doesn't like you. Though, why wouldn't he like you? That's, well, complicated. But the thing is, I can't afford to have him dislike me more. He is the man who stands between me and entry to the academy, he protested. So better to wait for another guardian of the gates. She tilted her dark-haired head to the side. Her hair was in a gorgeous set of braids that swirled over her skull and said, If he doesn't like you now, how are you going to get into the academy without winning him over before the admissions test? Isn't this as good a time as any to start a friendship with him? He swallowed, but his salivary glands were giving him remarkably little to work with. If I pass the test, you will pass the test. That's a given, she nodded firmly. A small smile graced his lips. Well, yeah. It's not a sure thing, but I appreciate the support. It is a sure thing because it's you, Finley. You would pass it today, but you're taking a whole other year to study. He frisked happily. Her confidence in him made it seem all the more possible that he could pass the test. And he needed all the confidence he could get. No human had even tried to take the test. After all, what was the point? Humans didn't have magic, so I applied to an academy of magic. But he knew better. Declan proved humanity had depths that no one else had even guessed, and Finley would prove it. Yes, well, I want to make sure I pass the first time, so there'll be no question that I belong at the academy, he explained. Gemma's right eyebrow lifted, another trait she shared with her mother. That eyebrow lift spoke volumes, but she only said, Really? Yes, it's not like I'm avoiding taking the test because I'm afraid of what will happen next. Gemma's right eyebrow remained lifted. He sputtered on, I still need to refine my understanding of Katir. There are so many terms that are just related to magic use that I haven't had a chance to learn their intricacies yet. Uh-huh. She pinched the top of her nose. I'm going to at least pretend that I believe you, but you better act like it's true then. I am, aren't I? Well, if you're so concerned about knowing the intricacies of magical language, then what better place than the Athenaeum is there to obtain such knowledge? The local library didn't hold all the info you needed on Vex, so I'm guessing it can't possibly hold all the information on magic, she pointed out. He blinked at her, cleared his throat, shuffled his feet, and blinked again. Finally he said, Touché. That's what I thought. She shook her head. Finley,
I understand that getting into the academy is your dream, and I also understand wanting a little more time to prepare for that. But the game is happening now. You need to set up Vex's backstory so that when you end this D&D campaign, you can slot him right in. This can't wait. You have paying customers. That was true. Very, very true. And if you got Vex wrong, well, even if his players wouldn't know, he would, and his pride demanded accuracy. His eyes slid to the biggest obstacle in his way. Glass scholar Neldor Lorave. The man was beautiful, as all sun elves were, though his nose might have been a little too narrow, and his forehead too high, and his ears too pointy to rank him amongst the most stunning beauties of the Arave world. But his mind was the most beautiful thing in Finley's estimation. All that knowledge packed inside, and if they were friends, or better yet, mentor and mentee, they could have long conversations about the contents of that lovely skull. Finley sighed. The thing is that the test is an objective piece of evidence that I'm worth his time, and not some hysterical, addle-minded human who imagines he sees dark towers through rifts, Finley finally explained. You mean when you saw Elithor through the rift? He nodded. Gemma's dark brown eyes went distant for a moment. I wish I could remember that day. No, you don't, Finley said firmly. He truly wished he could forget the day the Leviathan came. Not Declan's heroism, of course, but the deaths. So much death and darkness, and feeling helpless to do anything about it. All he'd been able to do was shout to Declan when a Leviathan slithered up behind him. He wasn't even sure if Declan had needed his warnings. The thing was that his best friend had been alone in that fight to keep them safe. Even now, he didn't dare go outside the dome, though we often saw Declan staring off into the distance, on particularly starry nights, and he worried that Declan was only staying in the safety of Tyrael for him. The truth was that he wanted to be Declan's equal. Well, okay, maybe not his equal, but someone who could hold his own, that Declan wouldn't have to worry so much about, and for him to even be able to help keep Declan safe for once. Her eyes focused on him. I do. I want to know how Declan. Shh. He held up a hand to silence her, and his eyes skittered towards Neldor. The glass scholar was still looking down at an illustrated manuscript, blonde head bowed, long fingers turning the pages, seemingly completely oblivious to the two humans hanging about by the front doors. Several Sun Elf scholars, in their high-necked mage robes, had streamed past Neldor and entered the library since he and Gemma had arrived. All had bowed low to Neldor, who had smiled at them and inclined his head in greeting. Ah, to have the glass scholar respond to him that way! Or better yet, to gesture for Finley to join him in looking at what he was reading, so that they might discuss the book's contents. Maybe Finley would have some insights that the other mages would not. His human mind would look at things differently than an Arave one, and Neldor, being wise and powerful and kind, would know this and value Finley for it may be just a little bit more than he did his other students. Finley sighed deeply. Finley, I'm old enough now to know what happened. I was there. I should be allowed to know, she protested quietly, realizing he didn't want this conversation overheard. He wrenched his gaze from Neldor. He understood her pain. Knowing things for him was crucial too, but this was different. You were with us, Gemma, but your mind doesn't want you to remember. There's a reason for that, he said quietly. Yeah, bad ones. Her lower lip stuck out. The biggest one is that I was little, a child. I'm not anymore. I know, but though I'm 23 now and I was only 18 then, I still can't really handle what happened then. Finley didn't insult her by saying that 12 was still a child. Gemma was incredibly mature for her age. She often seemed older than him. But the horror of that day when the Leviathan came, when her aunt was slaughtered in front of her, was not something that Finley wanted to have her remember. I've never said anything about that day to anyone, not even Dad and Mom, and I know Dad would really like to understand how. Here her eyes lit to Neldor, too, and she lowered her voice further. How we made it through. What I'm trying to say is that I know how to keep a secret.
but it should be a secret the three of us share. I have. Have what? Here she rolled her lips together. I have dreams. Finley bit his lower lip. Her dreams were likely her mind's way of trying to show her what happened. What kind of dreams? I'm in the house with Aunt Rachel. Gemma crossed her arms over her chest. You could feel the tension rising in her as she spoke. The sun is out. It's pouring through the windows in the front room. It should be safe. Leviathan did not like the light. It could destroy them. But there were plenty of shadows, even during the day, that they could flit between, sneak up behind a person, and end them. I'm sitting on the floor, cross-legged. Aunt Rachel's on the tan sofa. I can even feel the nummy carpet underneath my palms. She rubbed her palms together as if to wash the sensation off. We're playing a board game, Clue. I was winning. I bet, he grinned. Gemma was notoriously good at strategy. Probably got that from Michael. But she didn't smile in return. Instead, faint lines creased her brow as she tried to remember. Aunt Rachel was laughing, and then there was a shadow that crossed outside the window, cutting off the light. Or maybe it was in the house. It was a Leviathan. I'm sure it was. This definitely sounded like a memory, not a dream. Maybe they should tell her what happened. Fill in some of the blanks so that her mind didn't conjure up worse things than what did occur. Are there worse things than seeing your aunt enveloped in darkness? Finley sighed again. Even if he decided that she should know, it couldn't be his decision alone. Declan would have to agree, as it was really Declan's secret that they were keeping. And who was he kidding? Declan would never agree. Not because he thought that Gemma couldn't keep a secret. On the contrary, he would know that she could. She'd never tell. But Declan would not want Gemma to have to lie to her parents, their parents. Declan would rather she be angry with them than that. I can't really remember the rest, she said with a final shrug, but there was frustration in the line of her back. It sounds disturbing, he admitted lamely. What could he say? She was living that day in her dreams. When would her mind let her see a little more? When would that dream become a full-blown nightmare? It was. It is. She tightened her hold on herself and looked up at him with beseeching eyes. I can handle whatever it is that happened that day. I know. Do you? Gemma, you're one of the bravest people I know, but this isn't just something I can tell you without. Declan, she whispered, sudden understanding dawning in her dark face. Doesn't he trust me? What? Of course he does. It's not a question of trust. It's complicated. That's Declan in a nutshell. She smiled wanly. Yeah, well, he is who he is. She nodded. Will you talk to him about it? For me? She knew that he wouldn't budge on the silence without Declan's consent. He let out another sigh. I'll see, Gemma. Don't see, do, she said with a winning smile. It just might not do any good, and I don't want you to be disappointed. All you can do is ask. Not asking means nothing possibly changing, so please ask for me. She brought her hands together in front of her in pleading. Yeah, okay, I'll ask. Just remember what you said here. I will. Her gaze swung back to the glass scholar. And speaking about asking, you need to talk to Neldor. I really do think tomorrow will be time enough. Ah, what are you doing? Finley cried. But he knew what she was doing. She was flying him like a kite all the way over to the glass scholar's desk. At his squawk of surprise, Neldor lifted his head. His keen blue eyes focused on the two of them as Gemma pulled him right in front of the sun elf. Hello, glass scholar Raythe, Gemma said brightly as the ability to speak had seemingly left Finley. How are you doing on this bright, sunny day? Hello, Neldor said smoothly as he set down a quill and regarded both of them with equanimity. I am quite well. And you? Finley opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Gemma elbowed him. Still nothing. Wonderfully. My name is Gemma Baston, and my very quiet friend here is Finley West.
Gemma began sweetly. Neldor's blue eyes flicked to him. Finley froze. Would he remember who Finley was? Would that sad little smile appear on his face? No. There appeared to be no recognition there at all. It was as if Neldor had never seen Finley in his life. Finley had thought that the worst thing would be for Neldor to pity him, but to not remember him at all, to not make the least bit of an impression, was worse. So much worse. I see. And what can I do for the two of you? Neldor asked, his eyes dropping down to his book. He clearly wanted to return to his reading. Well, we would like to look at some books, Gemma said stoutly. Fine lines creased Neldor's forehead. I'm, not sure you would find any you could read in the Athenaeum. The human library is just on the block. No, Gemma said tightly. We need books that can only be found here. Her dark eyes were flashing with the beginnings of indignation, but she had plastered a smile on her face. Finley found his heart thumping heavily in his chest. Neldor didn't even think they could read the books here. He didn't even consider that humans could learn Katir. He should have waited till Neldor was gone, or... We do not have picture books here, child, Neldor answered firmly. These are great masterworks of Arve history, which would not interest the likes of you. Gemma's lips parted in anger and hurt. It was seeing that look on her face, emotions that he was feeling too, that had his voice returning to him. Are you working on the second book in your Blacksmiths and Gods series, last caller? Finley asked. Neldor's eyes shot to him. What? I see that you're reading the works of Grell Ironhammer. He was a historian for the Dresswin King Hein Greatfall. Neldor blinked at him. Yes. Fancy you knowing that. How do you know that? I've read the first book in your series, Finley told him, which had Neldor blinking even more. While I admire your attention to Dracewin dwarf culture, I don't think you're correct in your belief that Kindreth blood weapons were first forged by the dwarves and then adapted and refined by the night elves. Neldor's eyes widened but then narrowed. What makes you say that? He said that because he knew King Hein Greatfall's descendant, none other than Declan's boss, Helgrim Greatfall, who had told him it wasn't true. After reading the first and the Blacksmiths and Gods series, he had immediately gone to Helgrim to quiz him, but the dwarven tavern owner had laughed at Neldor's claim. Ha! Just like an Arve to want to tear down the Kindreth, even if it means raising up another species other than themselves. Helgrim had let out a great, bitter laugh. No, Finley. The blood weapons and most enchanted weapons that anyone wields, even the blessed Arve, are Kindreth make. And don't let anyone tell you differently. We dwarves make brilliant weapons, don't get me wrong. But the blood weapons are not forged out of metal and fire. They are made from blood and pain. Those are the Kindreth's specialty. But even if Finley had not spoken to Helgrim and trusted the dwarf's understanding of the matter, he knew it from his own reading. It was to this scholarship that he referred when he spoke next. Because King Vex's most powerful blood weapon, the great sword Doomshadow, was mentioned in a far earlier history, Blood at the End of the World by Einun Reiser, as having been brought to the Underdark, Finley explained with a surprisingly crisp, cold delivery. So you see, Vex already had a blood weapon before the Kindreth ever met the Dracewin. Hence, blood weapons have nothing to do with dwarves or their part in Vex's subsequent conquest of the Underdark. There were long moments of silence, as Neldor and Finley had a staring match. The affront that had fueled his speech to Neldor started to crack as time stretched. How badly had he offended the glass scholar? Had it been worth it to attack in order to salvage his pride? But it wasn't just my pride. He went after Gemma, assuming we need picture books for us to understand anything. That could not stand, Finley thought. Finally, Neldor's eyes left his and went to the book. I see. Well, Did someone read these books to you? He reads Katir fluently, Gemma got in, and he's teaching me. That was true.
and she was picking it up rather quickly. Well, when she cared to set her mind to it. But he had a feeling she would certainly do so now. "We want permission to check out books from the Athenaeum," Finley said, then added tightly, "Please." "And, what are you interested in studying here?" Neldor asked. Gemma opened her mouth, likely to speak of pride about his game and his need for information on Zelroth Vax, but it occurred to him that maybe knowing too much about the Night King wouldn't sit so well with the glass scholar. He put a hand on her shoulder to stop her. "The history of conjuration magic," he lied. Well, it wasn't a complete lie. He would look for books on that, too. Neldor smiled uncertainly. "Well, that is a worthy topic and quite extensive. It's also on the admissions exam to the Academy," Finley found himself saying. Neldor's eyes sharpened on his. "Yes, it is." Again they locked gazes. "I see," Neldor said as Finley said nothing more, and Finley wondered if he did. 15 minutes later, clutching the thick cardstock that represented his library card, Finley wondered if he had just burned all of his hopes and dreams of being close to the glass scholar down. But then again, maybe it was Neldor who had done that with his prejudice against humans. "Finley," Snaglag's voice brought Finley out of his reverie again. "Declan's been gone a long time." What?" Finley blinked and focused on the massive orc. His pitcher of beer was nearing its bottom again. That was likely why he noticed that Declan wasn't behind the bar. But no, that wasn't fair. The truth was that Snaglag was very attentive to him and Declan at all times. He just liked his beer a lot. "Oh, well, I'm sure he's just in the back." "No," Snaglag interrupted. "He went outside." For a moment, Finley felt a wash of cold go through him, and then a prickling heat. He was up from his chair before he thought of rising. "Outside?" Snaglag blinked at him innocently. "Yeah, to pour out the honey brew, I think." "How long has he been gone?" Finley couldn't help but think about Declan's earlier near collapse on the street due to exposure to sunlight. "Oh, it doesn't matter. Come with me. We've got to go get him." But Finley didn't get 5 steps before the door to the sudden dawn burst inwards, and the Sun King, Aquilin Fairland himself, swept through it. In his arms, seemingly unconscious or worse, was Declan. So, if you are wondering how I can publish this podcast for free, the reason we can, it's because The Night Prince is being supported by paying subscribers on my own website, raythe.com. I write chapter by chapter, which is why there are so many cliffhangers, because you have to end it on an upbeat so that you get people to come back and read the next one. And that allows also members to comment and tell me what their impressions of the story are, how they're liking the characters, what they're hoping that's going to happen. And that is just massive. It makes the story better, and the experience between author and reader is just so much more, I don't know, I think it's richer, deeper. I personally get far more out of it. I also love audio, which is why I started narrating The Night Prince as a gift for my members, as an exclusive podcast. And then everyone was like, "This is so good, you've got to share it." So that's why this has become a public podcast. And because I think also we could all use a little humor, a little romance, a lot of fantasy right now. A lot of fantasy, because the world is not exactly a very happy place in the current moment. So if you really do want to support us or be part of the reason that Raythe is able to keep doing this and we're here for the Night Prince, of course, becoming a member is the best way. But you can also pick up the individual books. I put the link in the notes so that you can go there, go check them out. All the stuff that we do is only made possible because of you. Just listening, liking, subscribing, and commenting and sharing, that is massive too. So don't feel bad. But I want to let those of you who know and do have the ability to support us financially that we're here and this is something you can do. But if you like, subscribe, and comment and share, invaluable. Trust me. Thank you guys so much.